all, and welcome to our part 2 of Sickcell's webinar series on value assessment. Today's session is titled Drug Pricing and Coverage Decisions. A bit about Sickcell before we begin. As sickle cell disease community members, we know how devastating sickle cell disease can be. However, we at Sickcell are working to change this. And we do this through a variety of different education and advocacy programs. More information about our programs are found on our website and our social media pages. We also have a monthly newsletter that we encourage you to sign up for and stay engaged about the events that we have. My name is Maggie Jalowski, and I'll be the presenter today. I'm the project manager for Sickcell, and I lead our initiatives related to value assessments and the ICER review. On the call, we also have Ashley Valentine, who's our founder and CEO, and we have Adrienne Shapiro, who is one of our board members and a recognized advocate in the community. Just some basic housekeeping. All attendees will be muted on the webinar today. We have a section of the platform that's titled Chat, and we ask for any questions to be typed into that section. At the end of our presentation, we'll go through a Q&A that time where we hopefully have the opportunity to answer those questions. Additionally, we are recording this webinar, and all of the past webinars and materials will be available on our website. So we are scheduled for a 4-part webinar series on the topic of value assessments and drug pricing. Last week, we kicked off the series with Part 1 titled FDA Approval, Now What? And we talked a lot about the differences between an FDA regulatory review versus the ICER value assessments. We defined value and talked about the importance of incorporating the patient voice into value assessments. If you haven't yet watched that session, we recommend you check out the link on our website. And then today we'll be covering our second topic, which is drug pricing and coverage decisions. Next week, our focus will be cost. We'll be looking at the cost of sickle cell disease, including direct medical expenses and other economic impacts. And then the last session in January, we'll discuss how all the topics tie together and what's ahead for the ICER review of sickle cell disease treatment. So today, our focus is drug pricing and coverage. Drug pricing is a very complex and often confusing issue, and it's shaped by a system of many different stakeholders and different transactions. There's a lot of attention being paid to the topic, as we've seen in headlines, news updates, and on the priority list for politicians. And there's also a lot of finger pointing, stakeholders putting the blame on other stakeholders. And so today we're going to give you an overview of drug distribution and payment from the patient perspective. And we're talking about how medicines are sold and distributed. There's a number of less visible concepts that are often lost in drug pricing conversations that we see in the media. So today we'll talk about how those stakeholders may have an impact on topics that are most important to us, on access, affordability, insurance coverage, research and discovery. And we'll talk about how all of these factors ultimately impact how drugs are priced. Through the presentation, we hope to answer your questions about the cost of medicine. And in the end, we want to talk about what we as patients and advocates can be doing to advance the dialogue that helps remove the cost as a barrier for patients while ensuring that we have access to our drugs. As easy as it may seem to blame a single industry, myth-making is counterproductive. And so we hope that today presenting the larger picture to the community can help us have more informed discussions about how we can look at the cost of life-saving treatment. So to start off, we'll talk about drug distribution and payment. So how is it that drugs reach patients? Last week, we talked about how drugs move from clinical trials through FDA approval. And today, we need to talk about how patients have access to these new treatments. So before we can go into the pharmacy and pick up the prescription, The drugs need to move from where they're produced at the drug manufacturer through down to the pharmacy. The first step involves wholesalers, which help distribute drugs. The business model for wholesalers rely on the ability to purchase large orders of drug products, and they have a warehouse and a distribution center, and they handle the shipments of the product. So the wholesaler is the one who ships directly to the pharmacy. And then at the pharmacy, drugs are prepared and ultimately dispensed to patients. So once the patient receives the medication, the drug distribution system is complete. However, the funding flow and where the money is moving is not. And this is where the cycle becomes a little complicated. So how do we as patients pay for the drugs that we receive? And where is it that the money ultimately flows? So who's making the profit off the way that drugs are distributed? Well, this supply chain that we just outlined creates 3 different transactions. The first one is from patients to the pharmacy. The second one is from the pharmacy to the wholesaler. And the last one is the wholesaler to the drug manufacturers. However, in the healthcare distribution and payment chain is much larger than what's displayed here. And this is because here in the US, we have third-party payers or insurance companies, government agencies, or employers that reimburse some of our healthcare expenses. And so now here's a diagram that looks at the multiple transactions and the numerous stakeholders that are involved in the distribution and the payment. Each of these individuals play a different role, and ultimately they have an impact on what the price is that we pay for our prescription medicine. The first one you'll see here is the insurers, which are insurance companies, government agencies, or employers. And then also you'll see that there's a middleman or a pharmacy benefit manager, which is often called PBM. And they're really the in-between between pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. Their job is to help develop the formulary, which is the approved list of medicines that will be covered by insurance. And they also negotiate prices with drug companies. Negotiation is a key part of this system. Pharmaceutical companies need to negotiate with PBMs to ensure their medicine stays on formulary or to make sure that their medication is going to be covered. And then also, in order to do that, the pharmaceutical company will negotiate rebates. We'll talk a little bit more about this. Also, private and public payers alike, or insurers as we've labeled them here, have powerful abilities to control drug expenses too. So today we're going to take some time to explain the different roles of the stakeholders that you see here, because realistically, each of these have an impact on the way that our drugs are distributed and the challenges that we face with drug pricing and coverage. So to begin, we'll start with one of the basic topics, which is where all the conversations about drug pricing start, which is the price of the drug. Much of the public debate surrounding costs of drugs focuses on the list price. The list price is the price that a drug manufacturer initially sets. However, the list price is not what the manufacturer generally makes off the drug. The net price, on the other hand, is the actual amount that the manufacturer makes off of selling their product. And this is once the fees from various stakeholders are removed. So as we talked about on the last slide, there's other stakeholders, including the wholesalers, insurers, PBMs, and all of those fees need to be taken out of what the net price, what insurance or what drug manufacturers actually make. So there's a really important difference here. And we need to be careful when talking about the price of medication, understanding if we're talking about the list price or the net price. So the next question is, what are these rebates and discounts and who are they paid to? Because the rebates and discounts are the prices that are coming off of the top of the list price. You may be familiar with how rebates work in other consumer goods. If you purchase a brand of contact lenses, you may be able to mail in your receipt and receive money back, which we call a rebate. However, when it comes to prescription drugs, our rebates work a little bit differently. So looking back at the diagram, we'll talk about what the purpose of rebates and discounts are. Overall, the ultimate purpose is to lower the cost of prescription drugs. And so they do this by offering these rebates and discounts to different stakeholders. We'll start with the wholesaler. The wholesaler is the one who takes possession of the medicines once they're shipped from the manufacturer. How do they earn a profit? Well, typically they earn a distribution fee that's based on the cost of the medicine. And additionally, they are able to purchase the medicines from the manufacturer at such a large bulk amount that they can get a discounted price. Then let's move to the pharmacy. Pharmacies have contracts with the wholesalers, and they're able to receive the shipments of different medications. So overall, they're able to receive a discount based on the size of the pharmacy and the purchasing power. Pharmacies also submit claims to PBMs to ensure that they receive the reimbursements for the medicines that they are distributing. And then we have patients. Patients pay out-of-pocket prices, which are your copays, your deductibles, your coinsurance. These are all different expenses that you may have. And then additionally, you pay money to private insurance companies, which is called our premium. And then insurers are the companies that we provide our premiums to in exchange for insurance coverage. Additionally, they need to pay a fee to the PBMs who are overseeing the management of the different drug lists and negotiating rebates on their behalf. So then looking at the middlemen, the PBMs, they're the ones to negotiate these rebates with the pharmaceutical company. Drug manufacturers negotiate with PBMs and offer money in return for PBMs listing their medication on the formulary. Drug manufacturers want to ensure that their products are included on the formulary so that they're covered, and so they will be able to negotiate and offer rebates with PBMs. In a perfect world, these rebates will go from the PBM back to the insurance company and ultimately to the patient. However, unfortunately, there's not a lot of transparency with this, and it's not clear exactly what these rebates are used for. Sometimes they are profited by the PBMs or the insurance companies, and then sometimes they go back and help lower the premium, so lower the overhead costs of our insurance plan. So how does all of this impact drug pricing? Well, we need to start by saying, overall, it's not really clear because of the lack of transparency on each of these levels. We know that drug manufacturers are solely responsible for setting the price of their drugs, and they do bear a large responsibility for ensuring that they price the medication fairly. And we as patients, we need to ensure that drug manufacturers are pricing their drugs responsibly. However, all of these stakeholders, not just the drug manufacturers, must be committed to addressing areas in the system that enables stakeholders to keep pricing of drugs high. For example, we know that PBMs have an important role in this. The PBMs make money off of high list price drugs. The fees that they charge in pharmaceutical companies are based on what the cost of the medication is. So this is creating a system where the middlemen are making more money if medications are priced high. We believe that we really need to focus on increased transparency to have a better understanding of how these different stakeholders are impacting the price of drugs and where rebates and other funds are flowing through the cycle. We recognize that if we're picking up prescriptions as patients, we shouldn't need to worry about the price tag. But we hope that this explains a little bit more that there's many layers affecting the final price that we pay, and that the conversations that we need to have as advocates involve all of these different layers. Another part of the puzzle in drug pricing is understanding why some drugs are priced more expensive than others. We've highlighted here on this slide, we've highlighted three major reasons that impact the price of some drugs when compared to others. The first one looks at the distinction between generic versus brand name drugs. When a pharmaceutical company develops a new drug for a condition, it's initially sold under a brand name, and this drug is going to be covered by a patent protection. This means that this is going to be the only company that holds the patent, and they're the only ones allowed to manufacture, market, and make the profit from the drug. However, once the patent has expired, then other companies can begin to manufacture and sell similar drugs or generics. Once generic drugs are on the market, the monopoly is removed, which encourages competition and results in a significant drop in the drug cost. However, drug manufacturers that are producing brand name medications are the ones who conduct the clinical trials and the research and development to be able to bring the drugs to the market. These clinical trials are incredibly expensive, and manufacturers need to recoup the cost that they spent on the development. This is why there's a large price difference between generics and brand name drugs. Secondly, we look at the difference between the cost of testing and producing some drugs versus others. Specifically, biologics, which are larger molecules, for example, monoclonal antibodies and similar medications, require a very complex process to study and produce these medications. However, in the past, most of our FDA-approved drugs are what we call small molecules, which are relatively simpler chemical structures. So it's important to understand that there's different types of drugs and different mechanisms to produce and test these drugs, which creates a difference in the pricing that we see for them. Lastly, research and development. This is a huge area for pharmaceutical companies, and there's a huge level of investment that's required in order to be able to bring new medicine forward. Additionally, FDA requires drug manufacturers to continue to study the drugs once they're on the market. So some of the differences that we see in cost help account for manufacturers to consider what they need in order to continue testing these drugs. For example, some drugs will be tested for new indications or new formulations, new dosages or regimens, and they also need to continue testing for safety and long-term side effects. And so some drugs may be more expensive to account for these research and design or research and development that's required. So let's tie this all back to the value assessments that we talked about in the last session. So as we talked about last week, what becomes really important once new drugs are approved is understanding what the value of these drugs are. What value is this bringing to the patient? Value must be defined by the outcomes and the costs of new treatments from the patient perspective. So who is using value in making these decisions? Well, we know that some insurers and PBMs are adopting value-based formularies. So they're making decisions on their coverage, on what medicines they will cover based on the cost effectiveness of treatment. Additionally, drug manufacturers use cost effectiveness analyses when determining the list price of their drugs. So overall, these decisions are being made by considering the value of the clinical outcome that the drugs can achieve. And the hope is that this will help ground the decisions that these stakeholders are making by using stronger clinical and economic evidence. Drugs should be priced according to how valuable they are, which means how are they improving the life of patients, avoiding medical expenses in the health system, or are they able to recover productivity in our society? So why is this all important for sickle cell disease? Because As we know, this is a critical time for sickle cell disease patients and community members. 2 new treatments are emerging on the market, and we as patients and advocates know how devastating this condition is and has been robbing people of life every single day. For over 2 decades, hydroxyurea has been the only option for this community. However, now these new drugs are doing more than just healing. It's also providing a new sense of hope. And as community members, we need to advocate for the most effective treatment available for all patients, regardless of their background, lived experience, or treatment preference. This week, we were alarmed with reports that we are beginning to see in the media. However, I hope that they're highlighting the critical importance for us as patients and community members to ensure that these myths will not impact the access on our drugs. Using the information that we've discussed today in this presentation, I hope that we can begin to have conversations about how important it is to bring the patient voice into the discussion about value and pricing. By looking, we can understand that drug manufacturers are not the only stakeholders that are receiving profit from these drugs, and that it's important that we have conversations with all of the stakeholders involved. Additionally, stakeholders need to understand that there are cruel side effects to some treatments, and these side effects directly result in medical expenses that outweigh the cost of new drugs. We need to ensure that these stakeholders are accurately comparing what the cost of drugs should be and recognizing the expenses that we're paying as a community. Additionally, we need to understand that it's important for not to stereotype patients and bring the actual patient perspective forward. Some say that patients and family members are too emotional to be included in these decisions on pricing, and that we're not able to accurately measure the cost and economic burden of our disease. However, our lived experience is critical, and it's also critical for us to consider treatment preference and having the ability to select the treatments that we feel are most valuable for us. Drugs that can save lives or make life more bearable are very valuable, and we need to ensure that we're including our voice into these conversations. Additionally, we can do this by responding to media outlets when they produce reports that may not accurately reflect the patient's voice or have inaccuracies in their articles. And then additionally, we need to do this during ICER's review of sickle cell disease treatments. As we talked about, ICER is currently reviewing new treatments, and we need to ensure that the patient's voice is included in their assessment and that they're able to define value by what matters to patients. As patient advocates, it's our job to ensure that we're talking to all of the stakeholders that impact access and drug pricing. And we do this through urging drug manufacturers to responsibly price their products, engaging with value assessors to ensure that they're adequately measuring the cost effectiveness and value of new treatments, advising PBMs and insurers to provide adequate coverage for life-saving treatments, and overall advocating for more transparency on healthcare costs and insurance decisions. We as patients are not here to defend the price tag for drug manufacturers. However, we need to ensure that the price accurately reflects what we're valuing. Drugs that can save lives are indeed important. And we do this through being armed with data and presenting your expertise. Your lived experience is critical to understanding the value. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about what data we have available and how we can be using this in the conversations about cost and effectiveness. So we encourage you to stay engaged. Please join us in the next part of our webinar series, which is titled Examining the Cost of Sickle Cell Disease. We'll host that next Friday at noon Eastern Time. And then please stay tuned on our website and social media pages for more information. You'll find the registration links to the upcoming webinar series there. And then we encourage you to reach out to us and stay involved. In the coming weeks, we'll need as much involvement as we can from community members. And so we hope that you'll reach out to us and let us know that you would like to stay engaged. Now, I'll turn it over to Ashley, who can talk a little bit about what we as advocates can be doing now on these topics of drug pricing. And then additionally, I'll ask you to use the chat section on the GoToWebinar platform to type any questions there, and we'll be able to answer them directly for you. Ashley?
Great. Thank you, Maggie. That was a very informative session, and I feel like I learned a lot, and we've been learning throughout this entire process about drug pricing and value assessments and coverage decisions. Just to give a little brief summary of what I have gathered from the community in response to the New York Times article and ways to advocate and to stay involved. In various conversations, the first major thing is equipping ourselves with knowledge. So really understanding where the misinformation came from and what the misinformation was inside of that New York Times article, because given the visibility of the platform, it's important that we educate ourselves and then we respond. The next thing that we have learned through conversation are many people are submitting letters to the editors and correction requests to the New York Times. So everyone has a voice, and we were saying that, ink in this case, ink saves lives. So using your words to express inaccuracies, specifically around the brain damage comment and the mandate of hydroxyurea, and the comment about Medicaid and Medicare. So that there's many areas in there that, depending on who you are as an advocate, impact you differently. So submitting a letter to the editor is great. However, today is going to be the last day that you can submit a letter to the editor, given the time frame that the New York Times requires. Likewise, you can use your tools on social media to post and tag the New York Times and speak about your lived experience there too. And then if you have more questions about any of the drug pricing or requests for transparency, you can go directly to the drug manufacturers and you can ask them their questions. You can reach out to any of the stakeholders that you saw in the article or involved with these drugs, and you can ask your questions there too. So we are entitled to ask questions about what we saw written down if we perceive that it didn't accurately reflect our community. I'll leave it there, Maggie, and I guess we can start opening up for Q&As if you'd like, if there are any.
Yeah, great. I don't see any questions yet in the chat box. We'll just give it another minute and see. Yeah, great. So we have one question that says, please talk about the role of Medicaid and Medicare in the role that they play in reimbursement. Ashley, did you want to answer this question, or do you want me to discuss this?
Well, we can tag team this one, Maggie. So the first piece of this is under accelerated approval with the FDA, Medicaid and Medicare are required to cover these new treatments. So we do want to put that out for everyone, that they have to cover the new treatments because of the type of approval that the sickle cell drugs are being approved under. Maggie, do you want to answer the question about reimbursements or rebates?
Yeah, exactly. So when we're looking back at the diagram that we showed, Medicaid and Medicare are included in the same insurer bodies. A lot of them do use PBMs as well, and so there are rebates that these bodies receive. However, some of them are mandated, and so the nuances are a little bit different than private insurers. However, the way that the rebates and the cycle works are very similar.
Great. Are there any other questions, Maggie?
That's the only one I see right now. And so again, please reach out to us if after reviewing the material, if there's still any questions that exist, we're here to help answer them, or if not, connect you to another stakeholder that may be more informed. And then again, oh yes, great. And then sorry, we had one additional question, and it's actually more of a comment, and I'm going to move back to one of our slides. And Derek, you've commented that really, as a patient, we need to also advocate to clinicians. And yes, this is a huge stakeholder that, you're right, is missing off of this sheet. And so as patients, we need to ensure that clinicians are educated on new treatments and our options. So we need to ensure that we're advocating to them as well. Yes, thank you for highlighting that. Great. Well, I don't see any other questions right now, but again, thank you all for attending, and we look forward to the next session, looking at the cost and specifically what patients and advocates can do to understand the cost of sickle cell disease.